Having recently graduated from my physiotherapy master's, I thought I'd make a video about how I ended up getting accepted to all the universities that I applied to, help you with writing your personal statement, prepare for your interview based on the scenarios that I encountered, and as a Canadian international student, how I ended up picking the country and universities for myself. If you're new here, hello, my name is Dion. I always wanted to become a physiotherapist, and now that I finally qualified and I'm living in Manchester, which is a city that I've always wanted to live in, I wanted to start sharing my journey to help you with yours. So when I was thinking about first going back to university and pursuing a master's, everybody basically called me an idiot.
What are you? An idiot sandwich.
Which is something I'm used to anyways, so I didn't really care. At the time I was living in Vancouver, and I was working at two amazing clinics as a massage therapist. I was working with professional athletes, Hollywood actors, grandmothers with knee replacements, you name it. And I was really happy as a massage therapist as well, but I felt like that was all I was limited to doing. Being a nerd about rehab, I always took time in my appointments to explain to my patients what I thought was going on, which made people always value seeing me. But at the same time, I wanted to do more. I wanted to create rehabilitation plans. I wanted to help people with their injuries. I basically wanted to help people become more resilient. And if you're watching this video, I'm pretty sure that you're thinking the exact same thing that I was. I'm happy I made that decision when I did at the time 3 years ago, because what I found out was that you need to have graduated your undergraduate degree within the past 5 years for you to even start your application process. I completed my kinesiology degree in April 2017, and I was planning to submit my applications for January 2022. So when I saw that, I was like, damn, Daniel, I have to get this right this time, and I'm not going to get a second chance at this. Which brings us to point number 1, finding the right place for you. If you're from the UK and you pronounce this as a whoa, you could skip ahead a little bit. But if you pronounce it normally like I do and say bottle of water, this next bit is for you. So if you are planning on studying physiotherapy overseas, before you get carried away on which country you want to move to or what universities you want to study at, I'd advise you to look into who your regulatory body is in your country to make things a little bit easier for when you go back eventually, if you do plan to go back. Since I'm from Canada, hence I'm wearing this t-shirt, it's the Canadian Alliance of Physiotherapy Regulators. They basically assess the qualifications of internationally qualified physiotherapists and regulate your ability to practice in Canada. There are tons of universities in various countries that they recognize. So my first step for you would be to go on their website and explore the options that you have available to you. For example, if you go to physiotherapy in Canada and click on source country profile, you'll see which universities and programs specifically are recognized. I wanted to move to the UK because I've always enjoyed working in professional sports, loved my footy, and I thought, how bad could the weather really be? In the UK, you don't have to pay per university application, depending on the university, which we'll talk about later. So this allows you to at least reduce your risk a little bit and apply to more universities than you otherwise would. There are also agencies like Across the Pond or Study in UK. To be honest, they're really helpful because they're aware of what different regulatory bodies in different countries are looking for, what they require when you come back to that country as well. And also they're affiliated with a lot of universities internationally, which makes them a little bit biased because then they want you to accept the offers from the universities that they're affiliated with. So I applied to Brunel, Oxford Brookes, and Manchester Metropolitan University for their pre-registration Masters in Physiotherapy programs. Pre-registration basically means that it's a 2-year Masters rather than a 1-year Masters. And you also get placement experience during, which is very, very crucial because I needed 1,025 supervised clinical hours to be able to return to Canada. I didn't have to pay for my application to Brunel and Oxford Brookes, but I did have to pay for my application to MMU because it was through a different process called UCAS, which is something you just need to keep in mind. If you're looking to study in the UK, comment which universities you're looking at, because it might be helpful for yourself and others to connect with people in the same boat. So I used an agency to help me with my application, and they were affiliated with Brunel and Oxford Brookes. And it helped me out, to be honest, because they wanted me to go there and I was thinking about going there. I'm kidding, I wasn't thinking about going there. But what they told me was that if I got accepted, they had scholarships and bursaries that they could offer students through their agency. So I'm like, okay, cool, I'll apply there just in case. So like I said, it is helpful to use agencies, but that's why I wanted you to look at the regulatory body in your country first so that you knew all the options available to you and you weren't limited by the options that the agency was telling you about. The agencies can help with just understanding what you need to put your application together and be able to anticipate costs, but they don't really help you with writing your personal statement and preparing you for your interview as well. Which brings us to our next step, your personal statement. So this is what the personal statement guidance looks like for Manchester Metropolitan University. The word count between the different universities might vary, but they all really ask for the same stuff. So how do you set yours aside from the other applicants? At the end of the day, all UK universities are preparing their students to be registered with the HCPC, be a member of the CSP, and hopefully work in the NHS, which is far from what I'm doing. And I'll definitely make a video on why in the future. So to help you with writing your personal statement, the first thing I would do is look up the HCPC standards of proficiency for physiotherapists specifically, and the CSP's codes for their members. I spoke to a lecturer at a university recently who basically told me that they're not accepting any students without any work experience in rehabilitation, whether it's as an assistant or a volunteer. So make sure that's a very big focus on your personal statement to help you get to the next stage. In my previous video, I talked about my volunteering experience in high school as a physiotherapist assistant, and also my career as an athletic therapist and massage therapist. So I used my past experience to explain how I've already upheld these standards of proficiency and codes of conduct that they would be looking for as a graduate physiotherapist. And try to reference that in your personal statement as well, because the more you show them that you're already familiar with that physiotherapy jargon, the better it'll be for you. I also found a couple of my notes from when I was writing my personal statement, and here's how I basically highlighted my work experience based on the NHS's core values as well. So the NHS is the public sector in the UK, which is where most of your placements will be. So look up the 6 core values of the NHS and tie that to your work experience, hobbies, and interests. And also look at common problems they're currently facing and what their long-term plans are, because I did have that as interview questions, which we'll move on to now. So preparing for your interview. So the setup for your interview does depend on the university. For Oxford Brookes and Brunel, I had to do group interviews, but for MMU, I did a one-on-one interview. And if you're an international student, be prepared to be awake at ungodly times, because I was living in Vancouver at the time and my interviews were at 2 a.m. and 5 a.m. So best of luck. The group interviews were a little bit longer, where they were about 40 minutes, and they were more discussion based with about 6 to 8 other candidates. These candidates were also a mix of people from the UK and international. So the more you're familiar with the profession in the UK as an international, the better it'll be. Looking back at the interview questions that I had, I could honestly answer all the questions I had with the standards of proficiency and codes of conduct. And it started off with questions like, what are qualities a physiotherapist should have? So that's where you talk about the 6 core values of the NHS, being compassionate, being inclusive, and all that good stuff. A lot of the scenarios that I encountered in the group interviews were basically problems that the NHS were currently facing. At the time that I was applying, COVID was very present. So the questions that I got asked were, how do you deal with burnout, and how would you basically deal with it as a physiotherapist in the NHS? So having an understanding of the current barriers that the NHS are facing would be helpful for your interview situation. They also asked us about how I saw myself contributing to the NHS's long-term plan. So familiarize yourself with what the long-term plan is and how you can contribute towards its success as well. My one-on-one interview was a little bit different, where it was a little bit shorter and it was about just 20 minutes long. And it started with a couple of broad questions and then very specific scenarios for me to answer. So the first question that I was asked was, why do I think physiotherapy is for me? And I saw this as an opportunity to talk about the core values of the NHS, where I said that I'm compassionate, I like working with others to help others, and I'm always striving for excellence. And I tied that to a little bit more about my personality so that the person got to know me as well. Keep in mind that you've already sent your personal statement and they've already read that as well. So this interview is a little bit more about them getting to know you as a person, because they already know who you are on paper. So try to tell them a little bit more about like your volunteering experience, if you're involved in charities, and just who you are as a person. The second question threw me off a little bit because it was more research oriented. The interviewer asked me, what are the differences between qualitative and quantitative research? What I've come to understand by doing my master's in the UK is that assessors will just keep asking you more questions to give you the higher marks and understand your depth of knowledge a little bit better. So if they keep asking you deeper questions, just try and keep calm and take that as a compliment rather, because they're trying to give you a higher score. So for instance, when I was answering the qualitative versus quantitative research, luckily at that time I was already reading a couple of research papers in anticipation for doing a master's anyways. So I basically said that the designs differ a lot and also the outcome measures differ a lot. So then the interviewer asked me, well, how do the outcome measures differ? And I said, in qualitative research, it'll be more self-reported questionnaires where it'll be information provided by the participants. Whereas in quantitative research, it'll be collected by the researcher in terms of being more objective data like joint angles or force output with dynamometers and force plates, etc. And she's like, okay, cool. How do you know if a research study is reliable? And I was like, well, I'll look at how the sample was recruited and also how the sample size was collected and if they managed to recruit enough people for the study. And I'd also look for any other ways that bias could have influenced the study in terms of recruitment and also how the study was conducted. And then the interviewer obviously asked me what are the different types of biases that I knew in studies. And I gave her a couple examples of different biases that I knew about and told her, yep, that's all I got. And she kind of laughed and was like, yeah, don't worry, you've given me enough for this question. So I was like, okay, perfect. Let's move on, please. Looking back at the research question, how I would want to prepare myself a little bit better would be by looking at the hierarchy of evidence. So you'd be able to give a lot better pros and cons for different study designs and different types of studies as well. So after those broad questions, I was given a couple of scenarios. And the first scenario was that I was working in the hospital as a physiotherapist and the patient requested to use a bedpan. What do I do? So given the scenario, I said that ensuring the patient's safety would be my biggest priority in the situation. And in order to ensure their safety, I would try and find a nurse first because they would be better qualified to deal with the situation than me. So I'd use the call bell and then try and find a nurse. And obviously the interviewer said, nope, sorry, all the nurses are not available. Keep going. So I was like, okay, cool. Because of the fact that I'm a physiotherapist, I want to help this person regain their independence. I would motivate them to mobilize to the toilet and I would help them with that as well by getting any crutches or any walking aids. And she said, okay, cool, but the patient is non-weight bearing, so you have to deal with the situation in the bed. So I was like, okay, fine. If I've tried to exhaust every other option, then I would give them a bedpan in their bed and let them do what they have to do. The second scenario that I was given was that I was seeing a female patient in a private clinic for a shoulder problem, and I asked the patient to uncover her shoulder and she refused. How do I approach the situation? So first I would explain to the patient as to why I needed to see the shoulder, and that would be to look for inflammation or bruising to help inform my assessment a little bit better. And the interviewer said, okay, great, but the person is still not compliant. I was like, okay, fine. Then I would try and ask the patient as to why they don't want me to do that. If it's more of a cultural belief, if it's more a religious belief, and also how we can better work with the situation. And the interviewer said it's more of a cultural belief and also the fact that you're a male. I was like, okay, fine, I respect that because of the fact different people have different cultural backgrounds. What I would do next was try and see if there's a female colleague available to help just lead this part of the assessment, and then I would carry on with the whole assessment and the treatment as well. And obviously the interviewer said, nope, sorry, all your female colleagues are busy, keep going. I was like, okay, fine. If I've explained the risks and benefits of seeing the shoulder and I've tried to find a female colleague as well, I would basically continue with my assessment without seeing the shoulder, or I would give the patient an opportunity to rebook their session with another female practitioner at another time. So I basically gave the patient different options and I didn't coerce them into one decision or take away their independence and their autonomy. So be very, very familiar with the codes of conduct and the standards of proficiency, as that'll really help you with guiding your answer a lot better. So that's basically it on the application process. I hope that was helpful in terms of helping you pick the right university for yourself and writing your personal statement and preparing you for your interview as well. If you have any further questions for me, feel free to leave a comment in the video down below and I'll definitely get to it. Having just finished my physiotherapy master's, I'm really glad I chose the UK, to be honest. Not because of the weather, but because of the fact that it's given me a lot of diverse experience in fields such as cardiorespiratory and neurology, which I don't think I would have got in Canada. So stick around for future videos as I'll explore how the scope of practice of a physiotherapist in the UK is a little bit more unique compared to Canada, my experience during my physiotherapy masters at MMU, and also what I'm up to now as a physiotherapist in the UK.